we're moving on. This is the next part of chapter 15. We're going to look at how fossils provide evidence of evolution, and then we'll talk real briefly about the differences between morphology and biochemistry. And then we're going to look at patterns observed in evolution and factors that affect speciation, which I don't think that's today. I think that is tomorrow. So I think just F, but it is going to be a little bit of a longer video. Just forewarned. So when we look at evidence for evolution, the whole theory of evolution states that all organisms on Earth have descended from a common ancestor. So again, this is one of those things that it has so much evidence and so much support, but yet it'll probably still never be a full law of evolution, principle of evolution. It'll stay as a theory, even though it is a very widely accepted one. Fossil evidence provides a record of species that lived long ago, which supplies some of the most significant evidence for evolutionary change. So these pictures that are here, obviously the one at the bottom is an armadillo, and there are connections to the picture above. It is what we call a glyptodon. It is armadillo-like. It is an extinct animal, but Darwin really believed that it was related to modern species, and you can obviously see some similarities between the two. If the picture was a little bit better, you could actually see some similarities between the feet, but obviously the armor plating on the body is similar, so it is possible that this is the glyptodon is a ancestor. But when we look at fossils, there's two classes of traits that researchers typically look at. Now, the first one is called a derived trait. So these are things that are newly evolved features that don't appear in the fossils of common ancestors. So one of the things, if you're a big Jurassic Park fan, which I am, I love those movies, there is a very distinct difference between the velociraptors that are in the very first movie versus the ones that are in this is an image from the third movie, and then even with the fourth with Jurassic World. So the biggest thing, because there's probably more than 10 years, so more than a decade between these two films, and a lot more research was found, and raptors were found to actually have remnants of feathers on their head. So there's a big difference between the physical look of these guys versus the ones that were shown later. So new discoveries allowed for a slight change in the physical features for this movie, and they do employ dinosaur experts on these movies just to be sure that they try to get it as accurate as possible. Now, the other class of traits are ancestral traits. So these are primitive features that do appear in ancestral form. So here is a fossilized horseshoe crab along with its modern day counterpart, and they are almost identical. The only thing that is really different is this part of the shell is missing here, whereas it has it right here. So these things do appear, and that's something that we can track over multiple generations. Other traits that we can look at, there's several different ones that you can look at to look for similarities. And the first one is pronounced homologous or homologous structures. So these are anatomically similar structures that are inherited from a common ancestor. So the one that is typically looked at is the arm bones for several different kinds of species. So we have the human arm here, and then all these bones are color coded so that you can see their counterparts in different species. But even though they are physically different, there is an inherent pattern similarity between all of them. So they all have one large bone. So on us, this would be our humerus bone. So they have one large bone there. The forearm consists of two different slender bones. So again, red and blue, red and blue. And then you'll have your carpal region, which are your wrist bones. You'll have your metacarpals, and then your phalanges. So like I said, there's a similarity between all of these species. Now, they all are mammals, which could, a whole nother line of similarities, but we could, even compare different species like birds and reptiles. All right, another class is what we call vestigial structures. So these are any structures that are the reduced forms of functional structures in other organisms. Now, the classic example is the human appendix. Evolutionary theory predicts that the features of ancestors that no longer have a function for that species will become smaller and eventually lost over time. Now, the theory around the human appendix is that it was an additional part of the digestive system when our diet was mostly based on plants. Now, if you look at the digestive system setup for plant eaters, they have more than one stomach in order to digest plant material. Now, our system as it is now is actually more closely aligned to that of a carnivore system. We can more easily break down meat and animal products than we can with plants. We actually can't really digest plants at all. We can't harvest hardly any of the energy out of there. So that is one of the theories, that maybe this appendix played a bigger role in early hominid species, but not so much anymore. All right, the last structure that we can look at is an analogous structure. So these are comparing structures that have the same basic function or purpose. So we look at the wing design for different species. So we have the mammalian bat, we have bald eagle, and then we have a dragonfly here. And then this one is showing you bird, bat, and I believe this is a pterodactyl wing. But wings for several species, they have the same general purpose and show a similar structure. Slightly different based on what kind of species you're looking at, but again, same basic design. All right, so some other things that scientists can look at when we're looking at multiple species is this field called comparative embryology. And this is really big with vertebrate embryos, so animals that have a spine. It provides glimpses into evolutionary relationships. So I put the definition of embryo on there, and it's just a pre-birth stage of an organism's development. But this picture on the next page, you don't have to write this down, but it is something that I like to show. The development pattern is very similar across multiple species. So we have lizard, turtle, pig, and a human. So if I were to actually cover up this bottom row, you really wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two, between the four. So very, very similar patterns of development. Other things that scientists can compare is biochemistry. So any kind of molecules that are used for metabolism, for respiration, for genetic control. Those are all things that they can look at. Our technology has increased dramatically so that it lets us actually do this on a bigger scale. One field that I find that is fascinating, I learned a little bit about it when I was in college, but I didn't get to study it as much as I'd like, was looking at something called biogeography. So looking at the geographic distribution of where plants and animals were and where what we call their cousins are found. So biogeography is just the study of where plants and animals are found on Earth. And it's actually really fascinating, especially when you get into island biogeography, which is really interesting. So the last little bit we're going to talk about in this video deals with the theory of adaptation. All of Darwin's ideas, so all of the proponents of natural selection and evolution kind of factor into this. Now, we had the definition of adaptation way back in chapter 1, so I wanted to include it again, but basically it's a trait shaped by natural selection that increases an organism's reproductive success. So if you think about, let's just do rabbits as an example. So we in Missouri have the eastern cottontail rabbit, and in the Arctic region they have the snow hare, distant cousins. But if we swapped where those two were found, so if we put the snow hare in Missouri and put the eastern cottontail in the snow, they would probably have very, very low reproductive success because their fur is designed to be camouflaged in with their surroundings. So the rabbit, the eastern cottontail, is designed to have those browns and grays and kind of blend in with shrubbery and leaves and that kind of thing. Whereas the snow hare has white fur, which is meant to help it hide from predators in the snow. Now, when we talk about fitness, this is more of a technical term, but it's a measure of the relative contribution of an individual trait that makes it to the next generation. So when we look at an animal's fitness, how likely are they to survive long enough to reproduce and pass their traits on to the next set of offspring? Now, we have a couple different types of adaptations that I want to talk about, and then we'll be finished with the video for today. So in general, the better an organism is adapted to its environment, the greater its chances of survival. One of the best things that animals have is the ability to develop camouflage, which makes them become almost invisible to predators. So this image, I know it might be a little bit hard to see, but there's actually a spider in there. There's a gecko on this one. Obviously, you can see the polar bear, but again, camouflage is meant to keep him hidden even though he's an apex predator. We have a tiger here, and then this, I don't remember the exact name, but it's sometimes called a leaf-winged butterfly. So the wings are the same coloration as the leaves to, again, help them blend in. All right, another adaptation is mimicry. It's when one species evolves to resemble another, and we typically see this as one species evolving that is not harmful, and it evolves to look like something that is harmful. So do have these examples written down. So we have the eastern coral snake. Coral snakes are very, very venomous, but it has a mimic, which is the scarlet king snake, and it's non-venomous at all. But it has a similar coloration pattern, so people generally try to avoid it. But there's a saying, it says, red touches black, friend of Jack, red touches yellow, bite a fellow. So red to yellow means dangerous, red touches black, not dangerous. And the other example here is the monarch butterfly, which is typically toxic to most animals because of the powder residue that's on its wings. But its mimic is called the viceroy butterfly, and it is actually not toxic, but it is similar enough in color and wing design that a lot of animals just avoid it because they think it's the toxic one. And then the last one is one that's come about in the last probably 25 years or so, antimicrobial resistance. Basically, this involves bacteria that have evolved to become resistant to antibiotics, which is a huge medical concern. When I was in college, MRSA and SARS were a big thing, but methicillin resistant, so methicillin is a type of antibiotic. So methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Now, Staph aureus is a type of bacteria that naturally occurs on the human body. Most of the time it's not dangerous, but when it's allowed to proliferate and basically reproduce unchecked, it can cause some severe infections. But this is the end of the video for today. There is another assignment to go along with this section, and tomorrow's video you'll get a break. There won't be an assignment, but if you have any questions, let me know.